Daniel Suvar.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Daniel Suvar, and I am Chief of Policy to Attorney General Kamala Harris, where I serve as her principal advisor on all policy matters affecting the department and help to manage some of our significant litigation at the California Department of Justice. Immediately prior to working for Attorney General Harris, I worked at the White House for President Obama, where I helped him to design and launch his My Brother's Keeper initiative, where we aim to keep boys and young men of color on track to reach their full potential, and I'm so gratified to see how the states have continued that work. I'm here today to talk a little bit about our philosophy in our office on how we approach some of these issues of boys and young men of color and some of the work that we've done in the last year to provide an update. As you probably know, the Attorney General has a Smart on Crime philosophy, which is focused on, first, relentless prosecution of violent crime, because we know that some instances of crime deserve nothing less than full prosecution. But we also understand that there are key indicators in the lives of young people which can tell us where they may end up later in life. For instance, third grade reading, elementary school truancy, high school dropout rates. Those are the key indicators that we look at in our work to try to prevent crime before it happens. And then finally, an approach to support victims of crime. As it relates to boys and young men of color, earlier this year, the Attorney General announced in her second inaugural address that we would begin a 90-day review of our internal policies at the Department of Justice on implicit bias and use of force. That process started with a series of community meetings, including with Community Coalition in Los Angeles, with Brotherhood Crusade in Los Angeles, meeting with youth leaders to discuss issues of law enforcement, taking into consideration their experiences with law enforcement and programs that we have deemed work and practices that work. I'm happy to say that as a result of that process, the California Department of Justice announced our first ever departmental policy on implicit bias for our agents, the Division of Law Enforcement. We achieved 100% training of all of our agents on implicit bias and use of force. And the department announced our first ever body camera policy for California Department of Justice agents. We believe that we're the first statewide law enforcement agency to adopt a body camera policy. In the coming weeks, we will roll out, as a result of our 90-day review, a post-certified course on implicit bias and procedural justice done in coordination with Jennifer Eberhardt at Stanford University. There will be a training for all California law enforcement on November 17th here in Sacramento and on November 19th in Los Angeles. We have worked very close with Post and have worked with them to designate implicit bias as a perishable skill, one that an officer must revisit continuously during their career. Also, as part of our 21st century policing work, the Attorney General has convened, and her staff has convened, a working group of key law enforcement officials from around the state of California since January. We've met more than a dozen times with key police chiefs, sheriffs, heads of law enforcement associations, rank and file associations, police unions, to discuss issues related to 21st century policing. And we have designated 3 subcommittees that are comprised of community-oriented policing, a procedural justice subcommittee, and an effective training committee. The committees meet regularly, and we are seeing a lot of progress in terms of local policies that are being rolled out, best practices that are being shared, and a lot of movement in terms of community surveys and involvement of youth and other local community leaders in law enforcement training and the development of local law enforcement policy. The next item that I thought I would share with you today is that in February, the Attorney General announced the creation of a Bureau of Children's Justice at the California Department of Justice. The mission of BCJ, as we call it, is to hold local jurisdictions accountable for issues related to the foster care system, to education, and to the variety of social services that localities provide. Also taking a look at private organizations that may take advantage of children, particularly in the foster system. This work builds on the AG's longstanding work on truancy. We know that a child that cannot read at grade level, at third grade, is 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. We know that a high school dropout is 8 times more likely to be incarcerated. And so as the state's chief prosecutor, AG Harris, knows that we can't just prosecute crime. We have to focus on preventing it before it happens. In the coming weeks, we will issue our 3rd statewide truancy report. Last year, our report indicated that 25% of African American kindergartners were chronically absent from school. That's 25% of African American kindergartners. This year, for the first time, we will have data in our report that is broken down by gender. So we're looking forward to sharing that information. And then finally, there's been a lot of talk about data today. I'm happy to announce that in the next 2 weeks, our department is going to begin releasing key criminal justice data sets that our department holds at the California Justice Information Services. And we will, as part of an open data initiative, begin to make public key data that show some alarming trends in terms of our criminal justice system, especially as it relates to boys and young men of color. So with that, I'll close up because I got the sign. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just real quick, because I've been hearing a lot about different programs, and I just one little clarifying thing. This whole movement or concept of boys and men of color started in the California State Assembly by a distinguished elected official from Oakland years ago. So when you say, I know you came from the federal government, that you're happy that Promise Keepers are happy that states are catching up, we say it a little differently. We're happy that others are catching up with us. Ms. Penner.
Happy to take over on that high note. Good morning. I'm happy to be here. My name is Linda Penner. I chair the Board of State and Community Corrections, previously known as CSA, prior to that, Board of Corrections. When it was CSA, I served as a member on that board. In 2012, the governor began the BSCC as an offshoot of, I think, confidence in community corrections in the state of California and wanting to highlight that agenda associated with that. I chair the board as the first employee of the state that is the chairperson. I came to Sacramento after a 38-year career in Fresno, ending with 9 years as the chief probation officer in Fresno. Happy to be here. Happy to represent a board I think that is doing a lot of great work. We are an enormous umbrella organization, and today I'm simply going to highlight 4 areas that I think are pertinent to the hearing today. And I'll begin with our work on RED, or Reducing Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the System. Pleased to tell you that prior to being called RED, we were DMC, which is Disproportionate Minority Contact. We've been doing that rollout of that program since 2007. We have funded 13 counties. We currently rolled out a grant for $1 million this year, where we are now funding Mono, San Joaquin, Santa Barbara, and Stanislaus. Recently, our staff attended a convening in Georgetown, and our team participated so we could be certified and further roll out of these programs. And we are working constantly to understand and become an expertise for technical information in the field for those who want to develop best practices surrounding this. Recognizing that 13 counties is not enough. Recognizing we could use more funding and roll out more programs and have more attention to this issue. We're pleased to be one of the primary stakeholders in rolling it out for the state, but also reckon with the fact that there's more work to be done. I think today you may be very interested in Prop 47. As you all know, Prop 47 was passed in November. Associated with that is a savings to the state of California that should be passed on to the local jurisdictions. 65% of the obligation or the funding associated with the savings is given to the BSCC for rollout across the state of California. There is a great deal of interest in this funding. The funding will begin to flow in July of 16. The Department of Finance is charged with identifying the savings to the state of California. I can tell you that I do not have an estimate as to what the state savings will be. I can tell you that the authors, that was fast. Oh, that was my 2 minute? I was going to say, I want more. I can tell you that the savings proposed by the authors was, in the last estimate they put out was $260 million. I'm not at all confident this is going to be anywhere near that, but I don't work in the Department of Finance, lucky for all of you in the legislature, but I will tell you that we're looking forward to seeing what those numbers are. You're probably going to want to ask me, how are you going to roll that out in a fair, efficient way, representing the population we serve in California? We have worked very hard to ensure that our ears and eyes are wide open. We have participated in the last 6 months in town hall meetings constructed by PICO. I can tell you I'm impressed with the state of California and PICO's organizational skills. Those meetings have garnered upwards of 700 people, and we met in 4 different jurisdictions in the state. With that said, we heard loud and clear what their needs are. The BSCC itself will begin to roll out our own town hall hearings. We will start after the close of the legislative hearing, and our launch pad is Oakland. Much like what PICO did, we will invite everybody on an evening to come forward and tell us how you see the rollout, any proposed savings may look like. It is a daunting job. There is a great deal of interest. I heard loud and clear from the dais already a concern about CBOs being represented in that arena. I'm here to tell you that we will produce for you an executive steering committee that will represent the diverse population of California. The Speaker currently has a bill that may very likely go into law, and that bill also highlights the Speaker's concern that our ESC represents a widespread of constituents in California. I can tell you that since Kathleen and Howard and myself have come on board, we have had an attentive eye to that. We have worked very hard to create certainly a sizable group that is workable, that represents all factions that would have some expertise in the area, and we roll out ESC after ESC. Of most recent note is A63. A63 is a funding for jail beds, but it is closely aligned with jail beds that are needed to implement treatment and programming while in custody. As you alluded to earlier, AB 109 has shifted the paradigm in California, closely followed by Prop 47. What we do know now is more people are spending time in custody, and while you're in custody doing the time you are allocated to serve, we want to ensure that there is proper, humane housing, treatment, and a rollout of individuals that have a keen eye on moving back into the community in socially adaptable ways with some treatment and a softer landing as you get out in the community for supervision. I understand what that means. Rapping. I'm happy. I'm not a good rapper, but I will rap. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Thurman has a question.
Thank you. 2 quick questions to Mr. Savor and to Ms. Penner. But first, I want to thank Dr. Julio for your testimony. We look forward to you joining the ranks of academia and getting that PhD. Thank you for what you're doing, and continued success to you. Ms. Penner, if you want to continue, you're talking about Prop 47, and I understand that a segment of that money is supposed to focus on exactly what Mr. Savor talked about, breaking the link between chronic absenteeism and truancy and the likelihood that our young people end up in the criminal justice system. And the awful stat that we just heard, about 25% of African American students ending up in straits of chronic absenteeism, which is why we've introduced a bill called 1014 that would give money directly to school districts to do outreach work, to work with the families, to get kids who are in kindergarten, and first grade, and second and third grade back in school. But how is the Prop 47 money likely to roll out as it relates to the truancy prevention components of our interests?
Well, let me begin by saying the best recidivism reduction tool in the world is prevention. And reckoning with the fact that you're aiming your money at a school-based program, absolutely, in my opinion, as a longtime chief probation officer and as the chair of the BSCC, I couldn't applaud that more. As we roll out the money with Prop 47, I assume it will have, we know the legislation itself requires an eye on recidivism reduction, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, and diversion programs. The Speaker's bill goes a little further. It begins to talk about priorities such as housing and job training, reckoning that every individual, and as we heard earlier in this presentation, every individual has a story. Every individual has their own needs as we move forward. Happy to tell you that counties, one after the other, have rolled out assessment tools that look at what we call the criminogenic needs of an individual so that we don't paint everybody with one brush. We begin to look at what are the strong points of that individual and where can we best support them to move out into the community. I cannot tell you specifically what the RFP, the competitive process, will look like for Prop 47, but I can tell you both the authors, the Speaker's bill, and the community have spoken loud and clear that they want an eye to all of that detail.
We'll await details as we move forward.
Details
Thank you.
Coming to a theater near you soon. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
I can't make you promises about those now.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Savor, you talked about procedural justice training being available for every law enforcement agency in the state on November the 17th, and we applaud that. I just want to make sure I understand the nuances of that, because as we've worked with police departments to try and reduce the likelihood of deadly shootings and other things, we've heard them say loud and clear that they don't have the dollars to make sure that every sworn officer can get to a training. Are you saying that that training is going to be available so that every sworn officer in every department in every city and county in the state of California will be able to attend?
So no, we're starting small. The first training will be 25 individuals. The focus in year one is on train the trainers. And over time, we will need additional funding if we do want to scale up the program. The first cohort also will need to be tested by our academic partners at Stanford to ensure that it actually works, that we're building an evidence base on the program. We think that scaling it up this year with a manageable group of law enforcement officials is the right way to start it. And if indeed we do determine that it works, in year two we will come back here and talk about scaling it up.
I know I'm not one of your evaluators, but we think it works.
We do too.
Enough that we hope to see this legislature put forward legislation again that would fund it at a broader scale for more departments. Does any of the training that's being offered through your office include any mental health training for officers in how they interact with someone who might be having a mental health challenge, as opposed to that resulting in a shooting or a death of the person that they're trying to help?
We do ask them to make those evaluations, which often occur in a split second in an instance. But part of procedural justice is taking the time to look at a situation, to step back, to de-escalate, and to explain why a stop is occurring. Taking that extra 15 seconds to explain what exactly is happening can have a dramatic effect on de-escalation.